say was, "Because it's happened before." She changed to, "Because it's so easy to spoil anything, easiest of all to spoil anything that's pleasant." "That might depend." "No, it's so, and if you care at all about knowing a girl who would like someone to know her—" "Just someone? That's disappointing." "Well, you," she said. "Tell me how careful you want me to be, then." "Well, don't you think it would be nice if you didn't give anybody the chance to talk about me the way I've just been talking about Henrietta Lamb?" With that they laughed together, and he said, "You may be cutting me off from a great deal of information, you know." "Yes," Alice admitted. "Somebody might begin to praise me to you, too, so it's dangerous to ask you to change the subject if I ever happen to be mentioned. But after all—" She paused. "After all isn't the end of a thought, is it?" "Sometimes it is of a girl's thought. I suppose men are neater about their thoughts, and always finish 'em. It isn't the end of the thought that I had then, though." "What is the end of it?" She looked at him impulsively. "Oh, it's foolish," she said, and she laughed as laughs one who proposes something probably impossible. "But wouldn't it be pleasant if two people could ever just keep themselves to themselves, so far as those two were concerned? I mean, if they could just manage to be friends without people talking about it, or talking to them about it." "I suppose that might be rather difficult," he said, more amused than impressed by her idea. "I don't know. It might be done," she returned, hopefully. "Especially in a town of this size. It's grown so it's quite a huge place these days. People can keep themselves to themselves in a big place better, you know. For instance, nobody knows that you and I are taking a walk together today." "How absurd, when here we are on exhibition!" "No, we aren't." "We aren't?" "Not a bit of it," she laughed. "We were the other day, when you walked home with me, but anybody could tell that had just happened by chance, on account of your overtaking me. People can always see things like that. But we're not on exhibition now. Look where I've led you." Amused and a little bewildered, he looked up and down the street, which was one of gaunt-faced apartment houses, old, sooty frame boarding houses, small groceries, drug stores, laundries, and one-room plumber shops, with the sign of a clairvoyant here and there. "You see," she said, "I've been leading you without you knowing it. Of course that's because you're new to the town, and you give yourself up to the guidance of an old citizen." "I'm not so sure, Miss Adams. It might mean that I don't care where I follow so long as I follow you." "Very well," she said. "I'd like you to keep on following me, at least long enough for me to show you that there's something nicer ahead of us than this dingy street." "Is that figurative?" he asked. "Might be," she returned gaily. "There's a pretty little park at the end, but it's very proletarian, and nobody you and I know will be more likely to see us there than on this street." "What an imagination you have!" he exclaimed. "You turn our proper little walk into a Parisian adventure." She looked at him in what seemed to be a momentary grave puzzlement. "Perhaps you feel that a Parisian adventure mightn't please your relatives?" "Why, no," he returned. "You seem to think of them oftener than I do." This appeared to amuse Alice, or at least to please her, for she laughed. "Then I can afford to quit thinking of them, I suppose. It's only that I used to be quite a friend of Mildred's, but there, we needn't go into that. I've never been a friend of Henrietta Lamb's, though, and I almost wish she weren't taking such pains to be a friend of yours." "Oh, but she's not. It's all on account of—" "On Mildred's account." Alice finished this for him, coolly. "Yes, of course." "It's on account of the two families," he was at pains to explain, a little awkwardly. "It's because I'm a relative of the Palmers, and the Lambs seem to be old friends." "Something the Adamses certainly are not," Alice said. "Not with either of 'em, particularly not with the Lambs." And here, scarce aware of what impelled her, she returned to her former elaborations and colourings. "You see, the differences between Henrietta and me aren't entirely personal. I couldn't go to her house even if I liked her. The Lambs and the Adamses don't get on with each other, and we've just about come to the breaking point, as it happens." "I hope it's nothing to bother you." "Why? A lot of things bother me." "I'm sorry they do," he said, and seemed simply to mean it. She nodded gratefully. "That's nice of you, Mr. Russell. It helps. The break between the Adamses and the Lambs is a pretty bothersome thing. It's been coming on a long time." She sighed deeply, and the sigh was half genuine, that half being for her father, but the other half probably belonged to her instinctive rendering of Juliet Capulet, daughter to a warring house. "I hate it all so," she added. "Of course you must." "I suppose most quarrels between families are on account of business," she said. "That's why they're so sordid. Certainly the Lambs seem a sordid lot to me, though of course I'm biased." And with that she began to sketch a history of the commercial antagonism that had risen between the Adamses and the Lambs. The sketching was spontaneous and dramatic, Mathematics had no part in it, nor was there accurate definition of Mr. Adams's relation to the institution of Lamb and Company. The point was clouded, in fact, though that might easily be set down to the general haziness of young ladies confronted with the mysteries of trade or commerce. Mr. Adams either had been a vague sort of junior member of the firm, it appeared, or else he should have been made some such thing. At all events, he was an old mainstay of the business, and he, as much as any Lamb, had helped to build up the prosperity of the company. But at last, tired of providing so much intelligence and energy for which other people took profit greater than his own, he had decided to leave the company and found a business entirely for himself. The Lambs were going to be enraged when they learned what was afoot. Such was the impression, a little misted, wrought by Alice's quick narrative. But there was dolorous fact behind it. Adams had succumbed. His wife, grave and nervous, rather than triumphant in success, had told their daughter that the great J.A. would be furious and possibly vindictive. Adams was afraid of him, she said. "But what for, Mama?" Alice asked, since this seemed a turn of affairs out of reason. "What in the world has Mr. Lamb to do with Papa's leaving the company to set up for himself? What right has he to be angry about it? If he's such a friend as he claims to be, I should think he'd be glad. That is, if the glue factory turns out well. What would he be angry for?" Mrs. Adams gave Alice an uneasy glance, hesitated, and then explained that a resignation from Lamb's had always been looked upon, especially by that old man, as treachery. "You were supposed to die in the service," she said bitterly. And her daughter, a little mystified, accepted this explanation. Adams had not spoken to her of his surrender. He seemed not inclined to speak to her at all, or to anyone. Alice was not serious too long, and she began to laugh as she came to the end of her decorative sketch. "After all, the whole thing is perfectly ridiculous," she said. "In fact, it's funny. That's an account of what Papa's going to throw over the Lamb business for. To save your life, you couldn't imagine what he's going to do." "I won't try, then," Russell assented. "It takes all the romance out of me," she laughed. "You'll never go for a Parisian walk with me again after I tell you what I'll be heiress to." They had come to the entrance of the little park, and, as Alice had said, it was a pretty place, especially on a day so radiant. Trees of the oldest forest stood there, hale and serene over the trim, bright grass, and the proletarians had not come from their factories at this hour. Only a few mothers and their babies were to be seen, here and there, in the shade. "I think I'll postpone telling you all about it until we get nearly home again," Alice said, as they began to saunter down one of the gravelled paths. "There's a bench beside the spring farther on. We can sit there and talk about a lot of other things not so sticky as my dowry's going to be." "Sticky?" he echoed. "What in the world—" She laughed despairingly. "A glue factory." Then he laughed, too, as much from friendliness as from amusement, and she remembered to tell him that the project of a glue factory was still an Adams secret. It would be known soon, however, she added, and the whole Lamb connection would probably begin saying all sorts of things, heaven knew what. Thus Alice built her walls of flimsy, working always gaily, or with at least the air of gaiety; and even as she rattled on, there was somewhere in her mind a constant little wonder. Everything she said seemed to be necessary to support something else she had said. How had it happened? She found herself telling him that since her father had decided on making so great a change in his ways, she and her mother hoped at last to persuade him to give up that foolish little house he had been so obstinate about; and she checked herself abruptly on this declivity just as she was about to slide into a remark concerning her own preference for a country place. Discretion caught her in time, and something else, in company with discretion, caught her, for she stopped short in her talk and blushed. They had taken possession of the bench beside the spring by this time, and Russell, his elbow on the back of the bench and his chin in his hand, the better to look at her, had no guess as to the cause of the blush, but was content to find it lovely. At his first sight of Alice she had seemed pretty in the particular way of being pretty that he happened to like best, and with every moment he spent with her this prettiness appeared to increase. He felt that he could not look at her enough. His gaze followed the fluttering of the graceful hands in almost continual gesture as she talked, then lifted happily to the vivacious face again. She charmed him. After her abrupt pause, she sighed, then looked at him with her eyebrows lifted in a comedy appeal. "You haven't said you wouldn't give Henrietta the chance," she said, in the softest voice that still can have a little laugh running in it. He was puzzled. "Give Henrietta the chance?" "You know. You'll let me keep on being unfair, won't you? Not give the other girls a chance to get even?" He promised, heartily. End of chapter.